Who is my brilliant friend, and why is everybody talking about her? Or at least there was a lot of buzz about this book when it was named the best book of the century by people in the literary community, whether that's publishers or book reviewers or literary critics, I think. And as soon as I got back from my long wedding and honeymoon holiday, I read this book pretty much in one day to see if I agreed with all the hullabaloo. To be frank, all the headlines that I saw about it being the best book of the century, I thought meant the last 100 years, not the 21st century. So I was more like, how could the best book of the last 100 years possibly be this random book that I've barely heard of? And how could everyone think that it's better than all the other classics you always hear about? I mean, to name a few, something by Steinbeck, something by Toni Morrison, something by Jane Austen, something by... I don't know who else. But then I came to realize that they meant the best book of the 21st century, so the last 24 years. Which begs the question, why the heck were they even making a list of the top 100 books of the last 24 years? 25 years I would understand, but 24 years? That's just very random. And I don't understand why that was done, but... whatever the reasoning behind it is, it resulted in this book being named the #1 best book of the century. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. To start with, I totally understand why literary luminaries named this as the #1 book, because it really reminded me of something that I would read in school, and I mean that in a good way. Oh, but before I get into that, one thing that is really building intrigue about this book is that no one actually knows who the author is. Elena Ferrante is a pseudonym or a pen name or an alias, whatever you want to call it. And what I found so fascinating after hearing that and after opening the book was seeing that the main character of this book is called Elena.
You don't say!
Is it autofiction? Is she trying to distance herself from the characters in this book? It feels to me that this author created like an alter ego to write her memoir so that she could write about her own past and her own upbringing without revealing her own identity and without revealing the identities of the people she's writing about. It is very intriguing that this woman who has supposedly written the best book of the century is anonymous. Very interesting. So now let's get into the book a little bit. So the setting is post-World War II, 1950s Naples, in this super poor, close-knit community where everyone knows who everyone is. There are all these different families. One runs the grocery store, one runs the cobbler, one is like the super rich family. Within that neighborhood, you meet these two girls who become friends. One is our protagonist, Elena, and the other is her friend who she calls Lila. Or Lila, I think is actually how you pronounce it, because it's Italian. And basically the book follows their friendship as it develops from a very young age through teenagehood and into young adulthood. Although they don't really pass teenagehood in this book. It's actually a quartet. So I think that is even more impressive that it managed to claim the title for best book of the century when it's not even a complete story. The friendship between these two girls is so fascinating because it's more a competition than anything. From the very beginning, they're competing in school. They are both alternating between being the best in the class. Lila is like naturally the best, but she's like a troublemaker, and Elena tries really hard and she has to like claw and scrape her way to the top, and she always feels like she, no matter what, is still second best to Lila. And this sense of competition follows them all through their relationship. Their competition is what more than anything, pushes them to strive for a better life, whether that means finding a way to make money or studying so that you can go to high school, maybe even go to college and escape the cycle of the families that they're born into. At its core, I think it's a novel about women's friendship, poverty and social climbing and sacrifice, community, toxic masculinity, and how it infiltrates society. As the New York Times mentions, it encompasses ideas about art and politics, class and gender, philosophy and fate, all through a dedicated focus on the conflicted, competitive friendship between Elena and Leila as they grow into complicated adults. Admittedly, I'm surprised that such a women-centered book got voted to the top. Anyway, what did I think about this book? Well, I think I've touched on some of it. I really liked the dynamic between Elena and Leila. I thought they were both really compelling characters. I thought the setting was really interesting as well. It was like its own character. The writing was really interesting. It wasn't like particularly lyrical. I would say there wasn't very much like setting description. How to explain it? There were a lot of characters named in it. There's a key at the beginning that shows all the different families, without which it would be very difficult to keep track of all the different people who are named. That was the world that she knew at the time, was just like the politics and the social standings of the different characters in this neighborhood, and the outcasts and the ones that all the kids were afraid of, and the ones that were bullies, and the ones that were rich, and the ones that got into fights, and the ones that would help your own social standing if you were to date them or even marry them in the future. So I kind of liked that. And I actually thought the writing was super beautiful. There were at times run-on sentences or sentences with lots of different parts to them, but it flowed very nicely, and once I got into the flow of it, I mean, I read it like in one day, so I think once I got used to the writing style, I just like flew through it. Yeah, like I said, I thought Leela was such a fascinating character. What's the word? Formidable. Like someone who knew exactly what she needed to do to get ahead in this otherwise very difficult place. I also love books where the character that you know the most about and who absorbs most of the book isn't actually the narrator or the main character. Like Great Gatsby vibes. I just think you can learn so much about a person from another person's perspective. I actually feel like we knew Leela better than we knew Elena in this. But at the same time, Elena is such a great character as well. She is equally ambitious to escape the generational trauma of this place by learning and opening her mind's eye and studying. To be clear, Leela, even though she doesn't have the same opportunities, does the same. And it's this constant competition of Elena trying to prove herself to Leela that pushes the story along, and I really like that. But at the same time, they are also friends. Are they friends? I feel like they don't get much comfort out of each other. They have such a conflicted friendship. But it's really interesting dynamic. Another thing I really liked about this book was the way it felt like a gang story. But for once, it wasn't just all these greased up men sitting around a cigar-strewn table talking about boring crap while the women like doted around serving food and just being pretty and just blending into the background, or only playing a role in relation to the men. Putting it nicely. There are all these violent alliances in the neighborhood, but for once you see it from the perspective of the women. And then, yeah, just the enthralling writing that made it easy to read it in basically one day. So, with that being said, did it deserve to be number one? That is a really tough question, because did it become my favorite book of all time? No. Do I understand why those readers who would be reading into the deeper meaning and the commentary on those themes that I mentioned would vote it as number one? Did that question make sense? Yes, I do understand. Thinking back to what I said before about it being like something I would read in school, it is the type that I feel you could analyze and pick apart with classmates, that you could write an essay on, that you could study in school and, you know, take different passages and read into the meanings behind them. For that reason, I understand why it was voted number one. Do I think it deserved it? I'm not sure that's for me to say, because I don't know what I would put as number one. Maybe I should do a part two that looks at all the books I've read that were published in the 21st century and rank them to find my own number one. But I think to do that, I would need to read a few more of the books that made waves this century. I'm just really pleased that such a woman-focused book was voted number one. It's about damn time. I'm really curious to know if any of you all have read My Brilliant Friend, what you thought about it, what you thought of my thoughts, and if you think it deserved to be in that best book of the century spot. Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed listening to me ramble on, I hope you will subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, leave a like, and check out some of my other videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!